My name's Don Clegg. I now live near Kielder Water, but I was born in Rochester, in Redesdale, on the 4th of January, 1933, quite a long time ago. And at first, when I left school, I was a postman for only a few months with a long, sort of 8-mile trek round the various farms in the area. And then I'd always wanted to go into farming. So my dad got me a job at a farm called Shittleheath. The posh people call it Shittleheath, but the locals all call it Shittleheath. And I was there for quite a short time, really. But round about 1950, I think it would be, that's when I started, and it was in December. Quite a cold December it was as well. Now, because my father was the headmaster at Rochester School, obviously I didn't come from a farming background, so I was regarded by all the local farmers round about as one of them bloody daft laddies. And of course we were daft because we didn't know anything, and we were always making mistakes, getting things wrong. However, I was very keen to learn, and within a couple of weeks I was an expert at mucking out. And I used to take a great pride in making sure that the byre every morning was as clean as it could be. And that was it. And this particular morning I was standing admiring my handiwork when one of the cows next to me started to lift her tail. And of course, being an expert, I knew exactly what was going to happen next. So I grabbed the shovel, held it underneath the cow's tail, and more or less said, "You're not going to make a mess of my new byre, clean byre." And she turned her head as if to say, "We'll see about that." And you can imagine, here's me in the firing line when she coughed. Just then the boss came in and he says, "What have I told you about opening your gob?" And that was it. So that was my introduction to farm work at Shittleheath. But, you know, being born in Rochester itself, I grew up there, and we had lots and lots of friends, and we used to roam all over the place. And things were very basic, but very, still very enjoyable. Everybody helped each other. Our water was across the road again in a garden. We had a long garden, but the one next to us had a spring in it. So we had to go across the road and into their garden to get a pail full of water. And that stood underneath the bench in the kitchen. And everything that you did that needed water came out of that pail. So you washed your face, you washed your feet, you bathed for that matter, in front of the fire, and used it for drinking, cooking, and everything else. Redesdale camp in those days was more important than Rochester. This is before the war, of course. And it was largely occupied by a lot of barracks where the troops lived, and lots more where the horses lived, because it was all horse-drawn in those days. And it was quite a thing to see the horses coming through the village, towing their gun carriage and the gun, everything glittering and jangling as they came trotting through, which was quite a regular occurrence. On Sundays, the officers' horses used to be exercised. Sometimes it was the officers themselves that were riding, other times it was their grooms. And they used to come down and stand in the village and chat to the children and so forth. And I know that 2 of the horses were called Josephine and Busty. So it's strange what you remember after all these years. Things sort of stick in your mind. But as far as playing was concerned, as I said, we used to go for miles and miles, mostly roaming the countryside, go down to the river, go down to the Reed, or across the Reed when it was shallow. Then further up, there was a waterfall, which was just known as the Lynn, and you go up to the Lynn to have a swim or a paddle or whatever. But because it was overgrown with trees and bushes, it tended to be a little bit cold even on a sunny day. So you go further up and you would come to a bit that was called the Dipper. And in the old days, of course, the sheep would dip, but not necessarily with any chemicals in the water. they just formed, the farm workers would just make a rough dam to make a bit of depth in the water, and then the sheep would be driven into a holding pen and then sort of pushed and pushed until they jumped into the river, swam across to the other side. So I'm not quite sure what good it did, but it was a regular tradition, if you like. Again, in the winter nights, there was always something going on in the village hall. There would be whist drives, and there would be a pie and pea supper at some point, and there was a dance almost every weekend, Fridays, sometimes and Saturdays. The Fridays were the favourite because they started about 10 o'clock and they would go on till 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was always just local musicians, lots and lots of local musicians used to play for the band. And occasionally you would get one of the more famous bands, people like Jimmy Shand and Ian Powrie and Angus Fitchett, who were the band leaders of the time. They used to tour the area, and I think they came to Rochester once. They would go to Elston, they would go to Bellingham, they would go to Woodburn, so that he very, very soon got used to all the tunes that they were playing, more Scottish tunes rather than Northumbrian tunes or Irish tunes. I must have hundreds and hundreds of tunes somewhere locked in my head. Occasionally they pop out, and this is when I started to play the mouth organ. And at first it was a case of Three Blind Mice or She'll Be Coming Round the Mountains and not playing very well. But gradually, when I met up with other people who also played instruments, mouth organs, fiddles, accordions, it became much more interesting to play with other people and learn different tunes and become more proficient at what you were doing. So after all this time, I'm still playing every now and then, well, quite regularly, with a group called Cross the Wannies, which fills my time in quite nicely.
I'm Cathy Scott. I worked at Otterburn Camp. I started in 1994. I retired in 2018. I did 24 years. Went back in August 2018 to do the flags, etc. There are 6 different routes to learn. Worked for the MOD for 9 years, then it was privatised. Landmark got the contract. I started as a general hand, and when Landmark took over, I was looking after all the fuel. Worked myself way up to the storekeeper, looking after the stores and fuel side, ordering all the diesel, petrol, everything. The troops come from all over UK, Belgium, Dutch, the Gurkhas. The troops stay in the billets in the camp. Sometimes they stay on the ranges, in the troop shelters. Jim was born at Salones on the range, where we lived from 1973 to 1989. Then we went to Cliffbrae to work for ADAS. Then moved down to the Dags in 91, which we've been here ever since. I worked at the care home at Otterburn for 4 years before I went to the camp because my son John was going to university at Huddersfield. I had one little incident at the camp one day. I went down to the CMF because I was told there was a light left on with the Land Rover, and I parked it outside the door, put the handbrake on, got into the building to put the light off, and when I turned round, the Land Rover was run to the corner, so I had to run to catch it before it hit the wall. When we lived at Sloane's Cottage, where the cows went to the burn for a drink. They ratched on at the side of the burn, and after a few weeks, a rocket appeared out of the soil at the burn side. We reported it, and they said they came and had a look at it, and they said it came off a plane, but just for a practice one, and they came and took it away because it was not live. Sometimes there is sheep getting shot. Mainly, hopefully the shepherds or the farmers come out and clear the area because they get a firing paper to say where they're going to be firing. But there is the odd ones get shot. The odd ones get knocked down. But they do get paid from the army for that. In lambing time, from the 15th of April to the 15th of May, there is no live firing. It is closed, so the farmers on the ranges can do the lambing. The roads are open all over. You can go anywhere along, not on the danger area, but you can go down up from Cottons up, right down to Alwerton, and come in by Holystone and come out at Bennisfield. Since I've fairly retired, I've done a lot in the garden. I've really gone to town and I've got a lot of plants in my garden now. I've really taken an interest, and I show at the local show. I used to show a lot of bacon, but since I've gotten into the garden, I've started bacon and showing. Jim shows vegetables, I show the flowers and the bacon. The show is the Upper Redesdale Society. It's the only show I'd bake at. I have started judging a lot of shows around the area. I've been to Ingram, Falstone, Bellingham, Pennymore. I've been to Kirkwempington, Woodburn, judging. When I do the flag run, I start at 5 o'clock in the morning, and my favourite run is up the Coquet. It's beautiful on a lovely sunny morning. You see all kinds of animals, and it's just beautiful when the sun's shining. Right up from, I start at Tango Barrier, I go down into Holystone, up Harbottle, Alwerton, and right up on the top of the Coquet and out by Cottons up, and it's beautiful.
Malcolm Corbett. I'm Redesdale born and bred, and worked on the farm here at Dykehead for the past 50 years. Well, I'm Redesdale born and bred, and born 5 miles down the road, and moved at Shittlehafe and moved up here to Dykehead in spring of 1952 with mum and dad, who were also, dad was a Redesdale man, my mum was from the Tyne Valley, and moved onto this small hill farm here at Dykehead, and I've spent the rest of my life here and thoroughly enjoyed my time in the farming community and in a wider community through political work with National Farmers Union and various farmers' organisations. In those years, as in every industry, I've seen many changes. In fact, I think I would say I've probably seen the biggest changes that's ever taken place in the agricultural industry, and that goes across the board and comes up to the LFA area that we have in Redesdale. I can remember as a very little boy being thrown on the back of the horse. Dad had 2 horses. They were Clydesdales, Jock and Bess, I remember them. And coming out of the field after he'd done the hay work, and in those days it was all horse work. And I can remember kyling the hay, which was the small heaps that you put it into when it wasn't just quite ready for piking, and piking the hay, and then going with the pike bogey and tipping it up and winding the chain round the pike and winding it on. It was a full summer work to get the fodder in, and it used to be, as well as the hard work, like the clipping, which I'll mention later, It was a social occasion because lots of the guys in the village, when they'd finished work on the camp or the council, would come and help the farmers to do the hard manual work. It progressed to leading bales. And that, again, as I touch on, was part of a community that I don't see now. There was a real strong bond in the community right through. My father farmed on a system that I called working with the dead hole. The death on the farm was quite soul-destroying in those years. Various things, lamb dysentery, blackleg, pulpy kidney, sheep. We now give one vaccination to the ewes, and that covers 7 in 1. It's been a massive, massive step forward. If pneumonia hit, there was nothing there to deal with it. We now have penicillin to deal with it. So our stock live longer, they live healthier, and as a result, we don't have the financial losses. And I think, to be fair, we've seen as well that has improved the living standards of families on large and small farms like this. And I can't complain about the living standard that I've had. 3 of the things that I've seen in the sheep sector that are related partially to the machinery is the quad bike, which has been a massive, massive change on hill farms, all farms in fact, but especially hill farms, where there was my neighbour onto the military ranges, and where there was 6, 7 shepherds on a fell, there's now 1. Getting the sheep in and getting them dry was always a problem. And it was a religious thing, the sheep had to be dry, because in those days the wool was of great value. We didn't have denim, we didn't have a lot of cotton. Most things was wool. The wool was processed at Otterburn Mill. And just as an aside, my dad had 2 suits in his life, and both of them were Otterburn Mill suits. Mum just kept putting a bigger gusset in the back to let them out as Dad went out over instead of up over. And so we would look out on a shearing day for the sheet to go out on the wall at Clough Bray. There was a white sheet hung on the wall. If the white sheet appeared on the wall, which we used to look out from our front garden gate, then the sheep were dry and away we went to shear them. And the shearing, as I say, was a marvellous community event. There would be 3, 4 different farmers and farmers' sons there. Was my first taste of woodpecker cider, which was lovely stuff. And the tradition was there was always a big tea and a big spread put on the shearing day. Why, I don't know, because the last thing you want when you're shearing sheep and bent over is a full belly, with all the cakes and scones and all the homemade bacon. So that was a great part in the social event. The other thing I remember as well is that we used to, now if we want a drink or we want to quench our thirst, we'll have a glass of water, or more likely a drink of diluted orange or Ribena or something. In those days, I can't remember my dad ever drinking anything but water and cold tea to quench his thirst. And when that tea was cold, Dad used it to quench his thirst, and it was something that us youngsters could never really get a hold of. I have now started to try and make a real effort to walk again, and I walk around my fell, which is not a big fell, but my favourite place in the Reed Valley is sitting on top of the Ridley Crag, for 1,200 feet in the air, up in high, and there's a particular rock I've sat on there, and I used to sit on it as a young man, and I now sit on it again. And you can sit on a nice quiet spring morning or summer morning and watch the cars going up Stephenson through the forestry, and you can hear a pin drop almost if the wind is reasonably quiet. So I used to put the banana in my pocket and sit there. But the real days that you sit there are the days when the mist hangs in the valley, and you seem to be sitting on a little island in a lake. And you look across and you can see the hillside and the forestry on the other side of the valley to look over to the Kielder water. And you sit there in silence, and life's worth living. And I think that a lot of my peers don't appreciate that because they haven't done what I've done, and that's stand at Newcastle station at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch a train to London and fight through the crowds in King's Cross, or drive into Bradford through the rush hour traffic through Otley and Harrogate. And so this is really a special place, and a marvellous place. And I think recently we've had more and more people throughout the country finding that out in terms of a holiday destination.
My love of dancing did start at Otterburn School, and then we moved back into the Coquetdale Valley and come to leaving school. That was when dancing started, because there was always dances in those days. And I had two friends, Rosie and Nora Beattie, who lived at Heppel, and their dad had a taxi business. And they used to take us every Saturday night to wherever we wanted to go, which it was Whittingham, Bellingham, Felton, anyway. We always went on sometimes a Friday night, sometimes a Saturday night. We were even known to go on a bank holiday when it was a Monday night dancing after the bank holiday. That was when we, as I say, followed the Reedwater Rhythm Boys, who were at that time all local lads. We always went by car, and there was always a bar, but the girls never went to the bar. The boys went to the pub and would meet up after they'd had a drink. They come in rolling legless sometimes, and meet up with the girls there. And there was very often a supper as well. But there was always one dance which used to be, which was at Elston in those days, was the Bachelor's Ball, which I suppose a lot of girls went to see if they could find a partner. Doesn't always work, but it was always a good night and very well attended. We had many laps and good nights there, but it was always after midnight when we got back. And sometimes when I was young, when we lived over there in Coquetdale Valley, we used to bike to Netherton from Holy Stone. On a lot of us, when we had no transport, we used to get on our bikes and bike. When Otterburn Club was open, and there was a dance sometimes Friday, Saturday and Sunday night, but normally Saturday and a Sunday night, and there were always good nights. Friday night ones normally used to have a Scottish band that would come all the way down. Dick Black, Colin Dewar. Sometimes we just had local bands, but always very good. It was a really good flow for dancing on in Otterburn Club. But there again, a lot of the old ones have gone and it's closed. No more. We normally do the Eva 3-step, Britannia 2-step, Joe McDermott's jig, Eightsome Reel, Morpeth Rant, Lomond Waltz, Military 2-step, Shifting Bobbins, loads of other waltzes that I cannot remember the names of. My first love of dancing started when I was at Otterburn School in 51, 52, and I lived at a house at the bottom of Bilsmore, which is no longer there, and the school car used to come and pick us up every morning and bring us back every night. And on that car was a local lad who lived at Blackster at the time, and he loved music and he played the accordion. He used to bring the accordion in the school car and play for the dancing we learned at school, and that's how I met Alan Colson. I've known Alan all those years, and when I moved to Rochester, he was just 2 or 3 doors up from me, so we always kept in touch, and he was a brilliant accordionist and is sadly missed. Alan and I were the same age, so we grew up. Although I moved away from Otterburn for a while, we still grew up and we still went to the dances that he played at. And had many a good night at Otterburn Club and various places round about.
My name is Robert Anderson. I went to live in the Reed Valley to Blakeburn Half in 1964, which was a Forestry Commission small holding. Small holdings were made by the Forestry Commission after they planted most of the hill land, which was planted with trees. I had land left from 3 of the farms in the district, which were, one was 3 miles away from my Blakeburn Half and the other was 4 miles away. And I farmed those with sheep and cattle for quite a few years. And at the same time as having the farm, I worked for the Forestry Commission as a machine operator, a tractor driver. The main employers in the district at that time would be farming and forestry, yeah. And it was the early days of the forestry and they employed a lot of men. As I say, at Redesdale, there would be about 80 men employed then, when I first went. They were just in the process of starting to thin the forestry, which would be in the 60s and early 70s, before they started to clear fell. And my job as a machine operator was drainage and maintenance of the forest, and on new land, drains and ploughing for planting the trees, which there were quite a lot of new plantations at that time in the 60s and 70s. My late wife, she helped a lot on the farm because every day I was away at work for 8 hours a day, really, sometimes more. And I used to work all over the district in the Kielder side as well. I was working on Redesdale Forest on the boundary one year, and in the distance on the hillside, these wild goats were lying in the sunshine. It would be probably half a mile away. Now, I thought at lunchtime, bait time, which we called it, I would go and see if I could get near them and have a better look. The wild goats that I saw that time were lying on the hillside, young ones, billies, all ages, and quite dark colours. They seemed to be quite wary when I went towards them, but they didn't move so far. Then I would stop and look. There would be about between 20 and 30, roughly, of these wild goats, and a lot of them were horned as well. My time in collecting tractors started with, I had an old Fordson tractor, which a lot of people had at that time. And it was the first tractor we had at home, an old Fordson. And over the years I went on to acquire various other models. But the most rarest one that I had was an international crawler of the 1960s, which was quite a rare model. The first tractor we had on the farm my father bought, when I was only about 16 at the time, it was on spade lug wheels, iron wheels. Then after we bought it, you had to do the ploughing with the spade. Look, we bought a set of rubber tyres to put on it, but it had metal wheels on the front still. This is a wartime model, because in the wartime the supply of rubber was in short supply.
What a privilege, Lord, to be able to speak for people a long time ago, Lord. It's 21 years. And in those 21 years, Lord, things have changed so much. When I went to the mill, Father, it was great. It was great to be among people, because I had started work from leaving school. I left school on the weekend and started work on the Monday. My father got me a job on a farm. But the mill, it was so great to go to the mill and work with people. And I was put in the room where the rugs are put right over the top of the rollers, and they rolled the rollers length by length so that we could pick the blankets clean. They had to be clean, absolutely clean. And so Renee Bell was working with me there, and we worked together. The two of us took half the stretch of the width of the blanket and picked. And we used to have great fun, because we were on our own. Everybody else was in the mill, so we were on our own in this room. And in this room we used to sing, and we used to sing all the old songs. And we just used to laugh and talk about our bairns and how things was working out for all of us. And it was lovely. It was a wonderful atmosphere. I think there was 3 gentlemen worked, because they had to make the blankets. They used to weave the blankets. I used to like to go along and watch them, because their fingers, they were like so fast in the way they were weaving the wool into the rug. They were chatting away like that. Their mind was, they were so used to doing it that their mind was on other things. But their fingers was absolutely 50 to the dozen to get the wool woven to make the rug. And they were beautiful. They were the world's greatest. They went abroad. They started with the baby rugs. It was the baby rugs that made it famous, because they were such a beautiful, just the size of the pram. And then there was the bigger size for the cot. And then there was the bigger blankets for the parents. And it was like we were making and kitting out the whole family. It was such a privilege to work there. The noise was horrific, because it was the looms going back and forward. So it was it was like a clatter. It wasn't just like a noise. It was a real harsh clatter as the looms were going back and forward. There was the looms, and then there was the you had to pick the blankets clean. Then there was the dyeing of the blankets, and then you went on to another bit, and that was when they were put over the teasler. They teasled the wool up when it was flat. You wouldn't credit that it was as thin as your fingers. But when they teaseled it, it doubled in size. And the blankets were beautiful, beautiful blankets. And then there was the teasels, the fringes. And we had to make the fringes as well. And you had to twist the wool and then cut it so that you had the fringe on the end, on all these beautiful blankets. And we used to laugh because they had to be just the right size. There was no one this length and that length and the other length. It was bang on or you were out. So, of course, if we had to be bang on, we used to try and cut a few together so that it was bang on. And if there was a little bit off, we cut that bit off. And then we would say, we haven't got to cut any more off. I will not have the proper fringe. But, oh, man, it was marvellous.